Preparation and mindset. I do a lot of training for interpreters of all skill levels. A lot of the teachings that I do is to help interpreters prepare to pass certification exams, either in the United States for the federal or state court certification exams, or for the medical interpreter certification exams. And one question that I get a lot from my students is, do you think that I'm ready? And this is a fair question for new interpreters who are nervous about passing an exam. But it's also a fair question for interpreters of all skill levels. And it's one that I ask myself constantly. Anytime I have a new conference or a new assignment, I have to ask myself, am I ready? And how can I be sure? So I want to talk a little bit about preparation and mindset. And my talk is going to be centered around 4 quotes that I constantly finding myself going back to, both as an interpreter and as a trainer. The first one is by the Greek poet Archilochus. We don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. I love this quote. If I had to put a number on it, I would venture to say that 90% of an interpreter's work happens before the job takes place. Preparation is the key to doing our work as an interpreter. Now, to be able to take on any interpreting assignment, you have to make sure that you're solid on 4 main areas. 1, your working languages. 2, the subject matter. 3, your interpreting skills. And 4, comfort with the environment and the technology that is going to be used. Now, the fundamentals, right? Have you built your breadth and depth of your working languages? Have you studied the subject matter and mastered the use of the terminology and the industry-specific jargon and words that are going to come up? Do you have excellent sight, simultaneous, consecutive skills, a reliable system for note-taking? And then adding to that, being comfortable with the location and the environment where the interpretation will take place. And now, just as important, familiarity and comfort with the different technology that is being used. For example, if you're used to doing in-person interpretation and now have to do it over the phone, or having your booth being replaced by any of the popular remote video conferencing software. So, if you've spent the hours or weeks or years learning, building, refining these core competencies, getting used to and adjusting to these new technologies, then you can actually begin the work of your interpretation. Now, I had the opportunity a few years ago to meet Dr. Edward Hundert, the Dean for Medical Education at Harvard, and Yo-Yo Ma, the world-renowned cellist. It was during a talk on music and medical education in Cambridge. And Dr. Hundert and Yo-Yo Ma were talking about the level of training that they had received, the practice and the years of study that they had in order to achieve the level of mastery required to do their jobs. Dr. Hundert was talking about his time in med school and his residency, where they had 100-hour weeks, where they were exhausted and had to go back for another 12, 24-hour shift. And Yo-Yo Ma talked about his hours of training. And they did this so they could build their on-demand abilities. Now, what do they mean by that? The key is it doesn't matter how exhausted they are, how stressed they are. They've built up their mastery so they can access their minimum required level. They can pull their on-demand performance when it's required. And their on-demand is high quality. And so that's what I mean by we fall to the level of our training. It's not a matter of, on your best day, can you meet the minimum requirements to pass an exam or to do a job, but rather, on your worst day, when you haven't slept, when you wake up with a cold, when you've had a fight with your significant other, you've got a flat tire, you're rushing to arrive on time, the equipment fails and you've got to scramble to find batteries, then the session goes on, you're working through lunch, and then it's 9 hours later and they're still going strong. At what level is your performance going to be? It's not going to be your best for sure, but is it good enough to get the job done? Now, I know quite a few interpreters who have spent time and money to pass exams, taking courses, refining terminology, and the best they ever got was the bare minimum to pass the minimum requirements of a certification exam. And then after they get into the field, they realize, and others realize, that they're not very good interpreters because they find out that the real world is many times a lot harder than anything that can be found on an exam. On the exams, all the voices are crystal clear, diction is good, the sound is great, everyone's quiet. Real-world speakers don't always speak clearly. They can speak 350 words a minute as they're rushing through their slides. There's background noise, there's papers rustling, a train goes by the building. If you only study for the ideal conditions and train for the ideal conditions, you'll not do well in the real world. The real world is noisy, difficult, and full of distractions. So the true test of your skills is not how good you are on your best day, it's how good you are on your worst day. That's when you fall back on your basic level of skill and basic level of training. Now, speaking of interpreter skills, your interpreting skills are perishable. Something that I tell all my students is, if you're not getting better as an interpreter, you're getting worse. This brings me to the next quote by Ignacy Paderewski. He was a concert pianist and he was Prime Minister of Poland. He was being interviewed by a reporter and he was talking about his daily routine and how he gets up and practices scales. And the reporter looked at him confused and said, "Why do you get up and practice scales? And do you need all this practice?" And he said, "If I miss 1 day of practice, I notice it. If I miss 2 days of practice, the critics notice. If I miss 3 days, the audience knows it." Now, it doesn't matter if it's piano, soccer, or interpreting. Your skills are perishable. You have to stay on top of them to keep sharp. I know quite a few interpreters who used to be very good, but they let their skills wane. Despite having credentials and passed very high certification or very difficult certification exams, they're just not as good as they were, and they're not good interpreters anymore. So this leads me to the next quote. How do you keep your skills sharp? Well, practice, right? Practice makes perfect. Well, that's actually not true. Perfect practice makes perfect. Now, I know, and I'm sure you do too, many people who have years of experience, but they're not any good because they've practiced making the same mistakes over and over and over and over, and they've gotten really good at making them. It's almost second nature. They've mastered mediocrity. And this applies both to new interpreting students as well as the more seasoned interpreters. If you don't continuously practice good technique, you won't improve and you can find yourself getting worse. As a seasoned interpreter, you can start getting slow, taking shortcuts, and start falling into bad habits, and then reinforcing them through repetition. And so, how you practice is how you perform. So, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Now, there's a lot to consider, there's a lot to learn, there's a lot being thrown at us in this profession. And there can be times where the sheer amount of work it takes to do our jobs and to prepare can seem extremely daunting. Now, this brings me to the last quote. And this is something that Yo-Yo Ma said when we were at the talk in Cambridge. He said, "Things are difficult until they're not." Now, Yo-Yo Ma was talking about learning new pieces of music, and this is something that can also apply to everything, interpreting students as well as to seasoned interpreters and pretty much anyone in the world. We're all facing new challenges. We're working on how to adjust with remote interpreting, the new challenges of software, hardware issues, getting the right microphones, headset, learning the new buttons, and adjusting to a new and hopefully short-term reality for our new profession. And things do at times seem extremely difficult, and they will be for a while, until one day they're not. And then we can move on to the next stage in our careers and in our professions. So I hope that these quotes can help you focus your mindset, help you prepare, and give you perhaps some better inspiration for the next steps in your careers.